This video is a continuation from the previous. So both symmetry and asymmetry can be used simultaneously throughout a design. For example, you have the outside of a building that is asymmetrical, but the patterns within the building or in the materials themselves are symmetrical. So there's that balance between symmetry and asymmetry. It can be tough to balance those, but if you can do it and do it well, it's really this great harmony between the beauty of symmetry and the interesting dynamic aspects of asymmetry. So repetition is just simply repeating a single element many times in a design. The building on the right, okay, the building to the left, I think I must have moved this around, repeats that one form over and over and over straight away. And so the pattern that it creates is very unified and carries throughout the design. However, the building on the bottom, it does repeat that same shape over and over and over, but it varies by material. And so the difference between the one on the right and the one below is they're both repetition. Just one is simple repetition, and the other one is a more varied pattern in repetition. And so we do this, repetition works because it actually makes the people who look at the design more comfortable. The eye works in a certain way by default. And so when you have invested time in looking at that first element or learning that first element, using that repeat pattern makes it easier on the eye, makes it actually more enjoyable to look at. And so by using repetition, it keeps the human eye familiar with our elements. And so then we are using that to create design that is comfortable and pleasing to the eye. And so we can use shape, color, font, texture, columns, bricks, right? Any other elements of design or materials to maintain design consistency via repetition. So in the end, we use repetition for reinforcement because what it does is it reinforces a design element. Patterns are a form of repetition where more than one element works in concert with each other. A seamless pattern is one where every element within the design combines to form a whole. And here, an example on the wall, the pattern is the hexagon. But to prevent it from being boring, the colors are alternated in a random order. So while you have symmetry, you also have asymmetry with the color. So the shape is symmetrical, the color is asymmetrical. So patterns can be very, very simple. It can be just like a repetition of squares, like a checker pattern, or they can be quite complex like we see here. And so you can create patterns in numerous ways. Patterns are a form of repetition. And so as you might expect, designers base most patterns on color, texture, and shape instead of things like words, because what we're working with are shapes, colors, right? The elements. Not that text can't be used. You can use text, or you could use words. Organic patterns are the opposite of geometric patterns. And whenever you talk about organic patterns, we're talking about things that grow or mutate or breed or meander, right? So instead of straight lines, there are organic patterns, curves, scrolls, vines, leaves, flowers, curvilinear shapes. And the example given in the background is there's a pattern there, but it is very organic in every conceivable way. Patterns can also help implement creative ideas. I don't know if you guys have seen this or not. This is a fabric. And it just uses cats as the repeating element. But it also varies them. Can you find the repetition? Can you see how and where they've created the repetition? You can repeat whatever you want, anything. kittens, arms, legs, heads, people, bricks. And so then we can then use those patterns to make fabric or wallpaper or other coverings that we use to create really interesting accents in our designs. Rhythm is when you repeat elements in a way that the intervals between those repetitions create a sense of rhythm. Kind of how it's the silence between the notes that creates the music. Same thing here. It is the intervals between the elements that creates the rhythm. So, and here are a couple examples here of urban art that has very colorful visual music that's played within it. Andy Warhol, right? He repeated Marilyn Monroe's black and white image over and over and over. And then he used random rhythm with the color by alternating the colors to create a very interesting pattern to his design. Now, keep in mind that you have positive and negative images, positive space, negative space. And so you can use those in really interesting ways to make your patterns hard to predict. In his migration series, Jacob Lawrence used elements that created both positive and negative space to generate a visual tempo of random rhythm. There's a very clear rhythm in this, but it is absolutely musical. And this is really hard to do. This is one of the harder things there is that you can do. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay, so regular rhythm follows the same interval over and over and over, like a heartbeat. You could just, create a grid and use that to work it out. And then what starts to happen with the human eye is that once it recognizes the pattern and then the rhythm, it will begin to see it over and over and over. And if there are any irregularities, it will notice that. And so that's why we talk about if you can work on a grid, you'll save yourself a lot of time placing elements in your composition because you'll know where they go based on that grid. So the eye likes to be drawn to outstanding elements, or I don't know, maybe not even likes to, just is. And here's an example of some ways that you can break from a generic repetition in order to create rhythm. Because regular rhythm can be monotonous. Like it's like a tap, 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 tap. So by making little changes to your design, you can help make this more interesting. And two examples there of how I did this using color in one and color and scale in one, and then outlining some of the circles in the other. So instead of repetition, boring repetition, I now have interesting rhythm. So here's also another way that you can create rhythm. To prevent it from becoming monotonous, just start adjusting the space between your elements. The one on top is an even frequency. The one on the bottom is an uneven frequency, though it still has a mathematical application. So say we pick 3 different spacings and then randomly, as best as we can randomly. I read a whole book on this, and I won't get into it. I won't go on that tangent. But chaos is not what people think it is. It was a really interesting book. But so when humans try to replicate uneven patterns, we don't do a very good job at it because we still try to form a pattern within the irregularity. But you can still try and it will still be fine for what we're doing. Here's another example. MC Escher was really great at using positive and negative space. Here he actually used positive, or let's put it this way, he used a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. And so that he rotated them all and created this really cool pattern in rhythm, and there is no leftover space. The negative space is considered. So there's something that can be called flowing rhythm, and that is when we start to use undulations and curves and bends. And this album cover is an example of flowing rhythm. In nature, you can see flowing rhythm in waves on a beach or sand dunes. We can do the same thing in our designs. So there's also progressive rhythm. We can make one by just changing one characteristics of a motif as we repeat it. So basically we could draw a series of circles, one above the other, making each lower one larger as we progress. So each time we copy and paste, we make adjustments. And then we copy that thing that we just pasted and adjusted and paste it again and adjust it, and so forth and so on. And that would actually begin to start to create a rhythm without losing the pattern. And it would create a flowing rhythm. And here's an example. I did that over here on the right. I rotated them and then deleted some, and rotated them and deleted some. And it created a very beautiful rhythm. Here it looks like a whale skeleton, but it is actually a series of photographs taken of a dancer. If you were to video someone dancing and then examine that video frame by frame, you would have a progressive rhythm. And so that's what someone did here. They took that series of images, like say they skipped, right? They started with 1, and then they took 3, 5, 7, we'll just do that because it's easier, 9, and they printed them out and then laid them over. Well, actually, they didn't print them out. They took them as digital images and laid them over each other in a sequence in Photoshop, and then used the darken mode to blend them all together and created this very beautiful rhythm. Think about how we could now trace around the outside of this, simplify it, and use it as the basis for a building. So here's the story. My client is a dancer, and she wants a space that represents the thing she loves. And now, by doing this, laying this out this way, we have now created something based upon her story. It tells her story. Now, this may not be her style. This may not be the way to go. This would be very complicated to build like this. Maybe it's something we're putting out in the garden, and we just have a series of shapes, simple shapes that create a trellis in the garden. And you could do that more simply. And it would create this really beautiful, unusual trellis that once the flower started to grow over it would be a very interesting and original piece of work that is based on the story of my client, who is this dancer. Okay. And references can be found here. All right, so this is the end of this lecture and the end of Module 3. We will move into Module 4 next.